So back down to Melbourne now and catch up with the Shadow Attorney-General, Edward O'Donoghue. Thanks for joining us, Edward. Are you happy that the Premier has said the buck stops with him? He's apologised and he's accepting overall responsibility?
Well, look, Chris, good to be with you this afternoon. Thanks for having me. The fundamental correspondent was just talking about who made that decision still is unanswered. And I think Victorians will be very, very unhappy that at the end of this multi-million-dollar inquiry, that simple proposition as to who made that decision is still not known. Chris, you understand how the political system works. If the Premier wants to know the answer to that question, he can find it out. It's simply unbelievable that the Premier or Minister Makakos or others can't produce that answer with an inquiry or not. So I think Victorians will be very upset, very unhappy, that after hundreds of deaths, thousands of businesses closed, still in stage 4 lockdown in Melbourne with a curfew, that we don't know the answer to that very simple question.
Yeah, I think that's extraordinary. I think the point you've made there is one that I've made weeks, if not months ago, and that is if the Premier didn't know on the day that this all became a big issue, then you would have thought he needed inquiry. He needs to talk to his public servants, talk to his ministers and find out. It's just beyond imagination that he hasn't found out exactly who made that decision. And just on that, the Health Minister, Jenny Makakos, has said for some time now that she heard about the private security guards most probably just from media reports. Well, have a look at this press conference back in March when she was speaking to the media alongside the Jobs Minister, Martin Pakula, and he made a direct reference to security guards. Have a look.
All of those passengers returning will now undergo mandatory 2-week quarantine at those Melbourne hotels with security guards in place.
We know that they are a high-risk group. This is why they have been quarantined, and it is also for the protection of their own family members. What we have seen play out across Victoria in recent weeks is overseas travellers coming back, getting sick, testing positive, and family members. So by them being quarantined in a hotel, it's actually their own family that is being protected as well as the wider community. So we ask for their understanding.
So there you go. Back in March, you've got the Health Minister talking about quarantine. You've got the Jobs Minister talking about security guards being at quarantine, but neither the Jobs Minister, the Health Minister, the head of Department of Premier, the head of the Health or Jobs Department or the Premier, no one knows who picked up the phone and said, bring in the private security guards.
That's right, Chris. And, you know, listening to Jenny Makakos, she's just an embarrassment to Victorians. And she undermines the notion of responsible government and ministers, you know, doing the right thing when things go wrong. It's simply untenable that she remains a member of the cabinet. But frankly, she should have been sacked by the Premier months and months ago.
Well, it looks like she will be the full person out of all age. Let's go to the other issue, though, and ADF support. And this one, again, astounds me because it really goes back to the Premier speaking to a parliamentary committee inquiry a couple of months ago now where he said he didn't reckon that there was a federal offer of ADF support. Now, again, back on March the 27th, when federal cabinet decided on these quarantine arrangements, Daniel Andrews' own press release said in black and white that there was the offer of ADF quarantine support. Edward O'Donoghue, he said it in his press release, and it's come out so many other times, yet the Premier is suggesting he didn't know about it.
But that's right, Chris. It's simply unbelievable that the Premier, didn't know. It's in his own media release. We know from the Secretary of Premier and Cabinet, the Secretary of Prime Minister and Cabinet, there was that offer. At emergency management level, there was the offer. The government, the federal government, was very keen to get the ADF into the Victorian system because they could see the risk. It's simply unbelievable that the Victorian government, led by the Premier, are continuing to say the offer wasn't there. It was there. It was clear to other premiers in the other quarantine systems around the country.
Well, in a political sense, and we all want to know exactly what happened, but in a political sense, in terms of prosecuting the Premier, when it comes to the private security guards, you've got this horrible issue of just nobody knowing what's going on. But when it comes to the ADF support, it seems to be deliberately misleading, because he's told Parliament through a committee that there was no offer there. We've seen in the Cabinet minutes and the press release and the letters and correspondence, I mean, it's so clear that there was ADF support on offer, yet the Premier's argument seems to be that that was a real offer or a major offer.
It's nonsense. It's nonsense. It's untenable and it's nonsense. It's misleading to the Victorian community. It's insulting to the Victorian community that is suffering so much. And if Andrews had any respect for Victorians, he'd go. He'd resign.
Well, I thought perhaps one of the most telling moments of his appearance today came after all the cross-examination, when he was essentially summing up, I think, in answer to questions from his own lawyer, and he took the opportunity to make a statement effectively to all of Victoria.
I want to make it very clear to each and every member of the Victorian community that I am sorry for what has occurred here, and I want to issue an unreserved apology to all Victorians.
There he is, the Premier there. Now, do you accept that that's the right thing to do, to make that heartfelt apology?
I think that statement was good. Words at the end, and I resigned, because those words are meaningless without action. And at the end of this inquiry, at the end of today's proceedings, we have not advanced further from when we were months ago. Chris, how can we make changes in public policy to stop this happening again if we can't even get the simple facts on the table through this multi-million-dollar inquiry?
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see what the inquiry actually finds, because I think they're going to find that no one knew what was going on, and that's not the way to run a government. But when you pursue this in Parliament, will the opposition be putting up a motion to demonstrate that the Premier has misled the Parliament, misled that parliamentary committee? Will you try and prosecute that argument through a motion in Parliament?
Absolutely, Chris. We have a motion of no confidence in the Premier and the government that will be debated in the Parliament when we next sit in October, and we'll be prosecuting these issues as much as possible. I fear, though, that Daniel Andrews will now say, I've answered all those questions at the inquiry, I've got nothing further to add. He's used this inquiry as a shield to deflect from answering hard questions, and I'm sure he will continue to do that.
Okay, daily infections now below 20 for a number of days in a row. The Premier will be announcing an easing of restrictions on Sunday. He will argue that his draconian measures have worked. What's the case against that?
Well, no other state has introduced these type of measures. Many other states, including New South Wales, which has had a number of outbreaks, because of its superior contact tracing methods and technology, has been able to manage those infections. But we have a very blunt approach of shutting the economy, closing down businesses, making tens of thousands of people unemployed to stop the virus. Well, the same objective could be met with a more nuanced, better reliant on technology approach. This is a slip, and it's had a terrible impact on Victoria.
Edward O'Donoghue, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Chris.
Pretty clear position there from the state opposition in Victoria. They say the Premier should resign. We'll hear a lot more about this, including in this program later on. But don't go away. After this break, we're going to check in on tourism in Australia. Also going to check in on American politics. I'm going to show you the political ad, perhaps the best political ad you've ever seen. Don't go away.
You're watching